1 for yes, 2 for no. A family was camping and left their tent to go on a day hike. They were a few hours from their campsite when a storm suddenly blew up. They became disoriented in the wind and driving rain. They tried to trace their steps back to the campsite, but became lost in the unfamiliar backcountry. Being experienced hikers, they knew once they were lost, it was best to stay in one place rather than wander the woods. So they prepared to settle down and wait for rescue. Darkness fell, and the family built a fire to keep warm. As they snuggled up against each other and started to drift off to sleep, they heard a noise coming from the trees. "Who's there?" one of the parents called. But there was no answer. Then they heard the sound again. But once more, when they called out, there was no answer. "Perhaps it's someone who can't speak," suggested the daughter. So her mom called out, "Is there anyone there? Clap once for yes, twice for no." There was a clap. "You were right," the parent said to their daughter. "There's someone out there." "Are you here to rescue us?" shouted the mom. "Are you lost like us? Do you live out here in the woods?" "Let me try," said the son. "Are you a boy? Are you a girl?" They all looked at each other, puzzled. Thinking he was being funny, the son asked, "Are you human?" Now the family was scared. "Are you alone?" called the mom. The family huddled together closer. "How many of you are there?" The camera never lies. Once, a group of hikers went up a mountain and decided to go on an overnight camping trip. Before they walked the trail, they had been warned by the guide not to spend the night on the mountain because unexplainable things have happened there. But the campers just laughed at the old man and shrugged it off. They proceeded with their hike, and when the night was fast approaching, they decided to get up camp and start their campfire. They spent the evening exchanging stories. Some were funny, some were scary, and some seemed almost impossible. After one silly story too many, they decided to call it a night, and the 4 campers snuggled up inside their tent. Morning came after a surprisingly restful sleep. Over breakfast, one of the campers decided to check out their photos from the previous day. When he got to the last image, he froze and went completely white. What he saw shocked him so deeply that he started shaking. His friends rushed over to see what was wrong, and there they saw a photo of all 4 of them sleeping inside their tent the night before. None of them had taken the photo. But what chilled them most was that their tent was shut from the inside and secured with a padlock. There was no way that tent could have been opened from outside. Monk's Hollow. It was a nice, peaceful evening, warm and quiet, but with fog beginning to roll in from the south. Johnny had spent the day playing with his friend who lived about a mile away. Between their houses was a thick, brambly forest called Monk's Hollow. No one ever knew why it was called that, but everyone knew that no one ever went in there. The boys always went around it. They played all over the other woods and vales, often hiking miles from home, but no one ever went into Monk's Hollow. Johnny had stayed to dinner with his friend, and by the time he headed home, it was getting late. He'd need to run if he was going to make it home before dark. Just as he had gotten a good stride, he slipped and fell. Pain shot through his right knee and in his head. He blacked out, but only for a couple seconds. He got up and tested his knee. It wasn't too bad. After hopping around a little and stretching it, he could hobble along. But he couldn't run. He'd never make it home before nightfall, unless... That was his first mistake. As he limped up to the edge of Monk's Hollow, fog seeped through the trees, and the air temperature began to drop. The slight breeze that had shook the leaves died to a dead still. It was quiet. Too quiet. Johnny picked up a nice strong branch that had fallen to the ground to use for support. With its aid, he limped ahead into the dark and gloomy trees. Soon the trees closed in above, and all light from the setting sun vanished. Straight on ahead he marched, knowing it would only be a quarter mile through Monk's Hollow, even though it seemed to be 1,000. Johnny's imagination began to stir. He saw shadows flicker to the side, and heard leaves crunch. Was that his own breathing, or something else? What was that over there? Johnny stopped and listened. Nothing. Just his imagination. Ahead, it seemed the trees opened up a bit, but by now the fog had enveloped Monk's Hollow, and it was difficult to see through the deathly white. Johnny trudged forward into the small clearing. From there, he could see the light from the rising moon filtering through the veil of fog. Then to his left, he heard grass rustle. And to his right. Now behind him, not limb-cracking, ground-thudding noises, more like the scurrying of many feet. Turning, Johnny sought out the source of this strange noise. Suddenly, he saw them. Dozens of pairs of pinpoints of light staring at him from the surrounding grass. They were all around, coming closer, and now raising their voices in a terrifying chorus, thirsting for blood and human flesh. He had heard of these horrible monsters, but thought they were only a tale. Now, Johnny had come face to face with the dreaded, flesh-eating, rabid zombie chipmunks of Monk Hollow. He swung his staff, taking out the first volley that jumped at him. 3 chipmunks fell to the ground, to be devoured by the dozens of others who chose the easy prey. This was Johnny's chance. He broke to a run despite the pain shooting through his leg. He thought it was just his bad knee, but looking down, he saw a monk had sunk its teeth deep into his calf. Johnny reached down, tore it from his leg, and threw it back at the others. They fell upon it in a savage mass of tearing and shredding. It took only seconds for them to consume the critter before they were back after Johnny at a full run, their cries rising over the fog and into the cold night. He knew he could never outrun them on his bad leg, so he turned to fight. That was his second mistake. He stood with his staff ready. Through the air they came, not 1 or 2, but at least 40 all at once. He swung and felt the crunch of bone, but there were too many. He felt a pain in his left arm, in his side, his right shoulder, his foot, his ear. They were all over him. Johnny dropped the staff and tore at the bloodthirsty rodents with his weakening hands, but for every one he tossed aside, another took its place. Consciousness slipped away. The pain had stopped. There was only a little pain in his head now, and one rabid chipmunk still licking the blood from his hand. It didn't feel too bad, in the end. In the distance, Johnny could hear a voice calling his name. It grew louder. He forced his eyes open, and he saw his mom and his dad kneeling over him. His dog was licking his hand. Johnny sat up and looked around. He was on the road, not too far from his friend's house. Maybe he'd hit his head a little harder than he thought. The monster in the woods. One summer, a group of kids went on a hiking trip in the mountains. They packed their bags, put on their hiking boots, and set off into the wilderness. As they hiked through the forest, they noticed strange tracks on the ground. They were huge footprints, unlike anything they'd ever seen before. "What could have made these?" one of the kids asked. "I bet it was Bigfoot," another kid exclaimed. Everyone laughed, but they couldn't shake the feeling that something strange was going on. They kept following the tracks, wondering what they would find. But they found nothing. That night, they set up their tents and built a campfire, and then sat around roasting marshmallows and telling stories. As the night went on, they started to hear strange noises coming from the woods. At first, they thought it was just the wind, but the sounds kept getting louder and more distinct. It sounded like something big was moving through the brush, making the branches snap and the leaves rustle. The same kid from earlier once again exclaimed, "It's Bigfoot!" This time, the laughter was a bit more nervous. As the noises got closer and closer, the kids huddled together, not sure what to do. Suddenly, a huge, hairy figure appeared out of the darkness and stood on the edge of the campfire's light. The kids screamed and ran for their tents, but the figure just stood there, watching them with its glowing eyes. Instead of roaring, Bigfoot waved and pulled out a bag of marshmallows and graham crackers and chocolate. He just wanted a s'more.